Welcome to the fifth episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford, and today we have an interview with Taylor Anderson, author of the Destroyermen trilogy. Welcome to the fifth episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. Today I'm happy to have the chance to speak with Taylor Anderson, author of the recently published Destroyermen trilogy published by Rock. The first book in Taylor's series, Destroyermen Into the Storm, was recently published in paperback, and the second and third books in the trilogy, Destroyermen Crusade and Destroyermen Maelstrom, are available in hardback. For those not familiar with the new Destroyermen trilogy, I'll give you a brief outline of the concept. Following a naval battle in the Pacific in World War II, the USS Walker, a destroyer originally built for the First World War, is magically transported to an alternate Earth along with another destroyer, the Mahan. The Destroyermen trilogy follows the crew of the USS Walker and Mahan as they discover non-human races battling for supremacy in this new world. Taylor, welcome to the Reading and Writing Podcast. To start us out, let's kind of go backwards for a moment, and I was wondering if you could kind of tell us how you originally got interested in writing fiction.
As far as how I got into writing fiction, I've been writing and doing things all my life that required, I'm having a hard time with this. Let's see. That's a difficult question. It really is. I've always been fascinated by all genres of fiction, from Arthur Conan Doyle to David Weber, to other things that aren't necessarily science fiction or fantasy. And I'm also very, very interested in history. I didn't really realize that I was crossing genres that much. I thought I was kind of following in the footsteps of authors like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and basically intended to write adventure stories. And as it progressed, I began to realize more and more that there was more to it than that, and the stories did involve a number of different genres. And it's really hard to describe. I don't know what got it started, unless it was just a desire to create a world that didn't exist.
Sure.
In which I could put characters that could have existed and see how they would react.
Sure. And I'm just curious. I know that some authors do have their first novels or first short stories published. Were there other novels or short stories that you had possibly worked on in the past before the Destroyermen trilogy, or was this kind of your introduction?
Well, I had written a few brief short stories back in college and things like that. Nothing that I ever submitted to for publication on a national level. I had been writing some historical fiction that I enjoyed quite a bit, but it's very strange. A lot of my friends that have known me for many years and know my historical interests say, what's the deal with this? Good grief, this is totally off the wall and unexpected from you. And I really don't know what happened. It was just kind of one of those things that the storyline got in my head, and I had to write it. The Destroyermen series was the first thing I ever submitted from as far as a novel is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really been gratifying and surprising to me, I suppose, how well it's been received. I'm I'm actually, my friends might joke that I'm incapable of humility, but I have been humbled by the reception that it's had, and I think a lot of this comes from my historical background, but I get so much feedback from veterans, particularly naval veterans, that talk about how I got the characterizations spot on and the descriptions of the old time steamships and the types of boilers, the fire control, everything like that, and they're just very complimentary, and that means a great deal to me, both as a historian and as a novelist.
That kind of leads me into one of the questions that I had written down to ask you, and that is, what kind of research did you do for the novels? Because as I mentioned before, the USS Walker is a World War I era destroyer, and I was just wondering, were you ever in the Navy? What kind of historical research did you do?
No, I was never in the Navy. I've always loved the sea. I've always loved sailing, and that's another example of why did I choose this? And basically, I think it all kind of boils down to the ordeal that the Asiatic Fleet endured after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor was almost an Alamo-like ordeal. They were totally on their own. They were outnumbered, incredibly outgunned. The Imperial Japanese Navy at that time was the most modern and powerful in the world, and the idea of these relics, literally standing in their way, was it may have appealed to my I don't know, my sense of the David and Goliath type of encounter. The stand at Thermopylae, the Alamo, the Rorke's Drift. So many of those historical events. And the more I read about it, the more the events that took place seemed almost like the storyline for a novel. And I think that's what attracted it to me to it. That and the technology that was involved as well. The old four-stacker destroyers were very primitive ships. They one of the first things that a lot of people notice about them is the anchors that they used are identical to the anchors that were used throughout the 19th century on wooden sailing ships. And the just the primitive conditions under which the sailors had to live, the fact that they were so just so neglected, so antiquated by the time World War II began. They don't look anything like destroyers as as people perceive them and as people picture them in their mind. I think probably what jumps into people's mind the most when a destroyer is something along the lines of a Fletcher class or one of the big all-gun destroyers of late World War II. Fast and sleek and bristling with guns. But the old four-stackers were not like that. Their primary armament was torpedoes, and of course, as a lot of people are aware, the American torpedoes at the outbreak of World War II were defective in many ways, and so a lot of the efforts that they went to and a lot of the actions that they engaged in were futile because the weapons that they had were insufficient, and of course in terms of the torpedoes, they were defective as well, and so a lot of people risked their lives or lost their lives, in vain.
I wonder, you mentioned earlier about your historical background, and I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit. I know from reading your biography that you have worked as a historical consultant for movies, and just wondered if you could talk about what your background is in terms of history.
Well, I came to history kind of backwards in a way. I've always been fascinated with the of history, the flintlock rifles, the artillery, 18th, 19th century artillery, things of that nature. And the more I got interested in them, the more I got interested in the history surrounding their use. And so when I went to college, I really, I'd been working for many years, and suddenly realized I'd been going to a community college, and suddenly realized I was virtually had a degree. I just needed to pick a major, and I thought, well, I'll do history. And of course, you can't do a heck of a lot with a history degree, and so I'll get a master's degree. And and so there I was with a master's degree, and still basically building custom flintlocks and things for people, and then I decided to teach. Well, I taught at Tarleton State University for a number of years, and then I opened a shop where I sold these custom flintlock rifles, wheel locks, a variety of different things, everything from box lock flintlock pistols to 3,000-pound artillery pieces. And I still would teach occasional if I had the time, and I still do. I really enjoy teaching. Unfortunately, the public school system doesn't seem to be. I have noticed a decline in the product, to be honest with you, and it's a shame. But there are a few things that are more gratifying than seeing the light bulb come on over a kid's head.
Right.
When you're telling when you're teaching history or anything, I imagine. And so because of that, and because of that occasional gratification I get when you realize that some student is getting it, I still love to teach when I have an opportunity. As far as the other historical pursuits are concerned, that was almost accidental in how it began. Well, I guess not accidental, but it wasn't deliberate, I guess. I was building the small arms and things of that nature, and had a number of clients all over the country, and quite a few in other countries as well. That museums, sportsmen, people that used them for competitive shooting. And I just, everybody loves cannons, I guess, and I decided I had to have a cannon. And I built one using the original Mordecai specifications, 1841. Started out with a couple of mountain howitzers and just went up from there, wound up with a 6-pound field piece. And I guess because not that many people have cannons, word spread, and I began to be contacted by movie companies to bring them out and use them in the movies. I always insisted that I and some of the people that I brought with me crew the guns, because there are certain safety procedures that are necessary when you have accidents with artillery pieces. It's not like a superficial burn or something like that you get from a small arm when it goes off too close to your skin. It's you can lose body parts, and they can be extremely dangerous to the users if they're not acquainted with the proper safety procedures. And so over time, we developed a reputation for safety, And since we didn't belong to any of the unions and really didn't care what very much what anybody thought, when we were on the movie sets, we if somebody was trying to do something screwy with a cannon that would get somebody hurt, we didn't care who we yelled at. And
Right.
oddly enough, even if it was a director, eventually they realized that, hey, we know what we're doing. They don't know what they're doing, and we're going to be safe about it. And one of our guys that I've known for close to 30 years, that's always been involved in virtually every movie I've been involved with in one fashion or other, told one of the directors, says, hey, we'll make it blow soap bubbles if you want us to, but we're going to do it our way.
Right. and what were some of the movies? What were the names of some of the movies that you worked with?
Oh, let's see. Actual cannons on film in quite a few, and I've been I've consulted on quite a few that I wasn't actually on, and sometimes I've actually been on film myself. But let's see, the most recent was the as far as movies are concerned, was the 2003 or 2004 Alamo.
Oh, okay.
And I was in charge of all the artillery on that film. There were a few little historical inconsistencies that they did that I wasn't too happy about, and so they asked me what I wanted to be credited with, and I said artillery trainer instead of advisor, because I didn't want anybody to think that one particular scene was my idea. But I was very proud of the crews I trained, and I had some good help with that from a number of people, and because we trained probably more artillerymen for that movie than had been trained for muzzleloading artillery since the Army of the Potomac, and it was very impressive. We used the Mexican drill, we used Scott's drill, we used a variety of different drills for the defenders inside the Alamo, so that they could use short crews. Because if they'd crewed every gun that was in the Alamo, they wouldn't have had anybody firing rifles if they'd crewed them with the proper number of people. And we did all the sound for the film. We went out to a gravel pit, basically, and fired live rounds for sound, and we destroyed a few microphones, and but the sound people thought that was a hoot. And some of the sounds that they'll probably be using them in movies for 50 years because they were so great. We loaded cut nails, for example, in lead sabots so they wouldn't damage the barrels of the cannons, and fired those so you could get that visceral whistling, shrieking sound that shows up in the movie when they're just throwing everything they can down the barrels of the guns. And it was great stuff. And we did all the small arms sound as well. It's kind of funny to watch Billy Bob firing his rifle and know which rifle it was that made the sound. Of course, it's not, it wasn't his. And but things like that, it's fun, particularly in retrospect when you begin to forget all the misery of being on set for 7.5 months. But and it usually takes me a few years before I can watch a movie that I've been involved in and really enjoy it. One that we did a number of years ago was called Rough Riders, and we did the artillery portions for that, and some of our other guys were involved in training the infantry, the 71st New York. And at the time when it first came out, I was, oh man, it's this, that, and the other thing. You're always picking out detail that they had gotten right. For example, it's little stuff like the the 71st New York in reality had sky blue piping on their uniforms. Well, in the movie they don't.
Mm-hmm.
But of course that's a tiny thing. And on the whole, the movie, after a few years, I watched it again. I said, man, that's a good movie, You tend to forget all the little things that nag at you when you're arguing with producers and stuff. So, no, this isn't right. And over time, you forget a lot of that stuff. We did all the artillery scenes for American Outlaws, which was very strange for us because at the time we didn't realize that it was supposed to be, kind of a humorous, cartoonish version of the Jesse James tale.
Right.
We thought they were trying to do a serious historical movie, and so we got into all kinds of arguments with people, about well, that couldn't possibly do that, or if you really want us to do something, that looks real, we can do this. They blew up my cannon with a Henry rifle, for example. I said, that's nuts. Yeah. And it's an entertaining movie. It's poor history, of course, but it's an entertaining movie, and that's when it started to hit me, I guess, that hey, it's just a movie after all. But I'm still very keen on historical accuracy in anything that we do because a lot more people are starting to notice it.
Right.
John Wayne could get away with carrying a .92 Winchester in the Civil War because he was John Wayne, and people went to see John Wayne.
Right.
That doesn't pass. It doesn't fly anymore, and I'm glad to see that in a variety of historical movies, not just westerns or even military movies per se, that a lot more attention is paid to historical accuracy. At this convention I was at this last weekend, I was on a panel with David Weber, who's a great guy, absolutely one of my favorite authors, and we were discussing creating alternate worlds or alternate universes or things of that nature. And I was using black powder technology time period as an example of how in science fiction and fantasy in particular, it's my opinion that in order to sustain the suspension of disbelief, if you will, sometimes you need to have some reality mixed in.
Right.
That was one of the reasons I did so much research for the Destroyerman series to try and get the environment, the feel of the ship so right, so that people would almost feel well they would get to know it as a character in its own right.
Right.
But I can't remember exactly what brought it up, but I was talking about how disconcerting it can be when you're reading a book, you're enjoying it. Some black powder society is about to engage in a battle, and the cannons roar, and all of a sudden the field is choked with black smoke. Well, black powder smoke is the purest white you ever saw. and something like that to somebody that knows, and there's a lot of people that know,
right,
is jarring, and it undermines, I think, the author's ability to suspend the reader's disbelief. And one member of the audience, I believe he was an aspiring writer, said, "Well, if it's fantasy, what difference does it make?" And I said, "Well, if it's fantasy, to me, in my opinion, it's almost more important that you throw in the little factual tidbits in order to ground the fantasy, if you know what I'm saying."
Right.
And he said, "Well, I'm going to keep the black smoke because it sets the mood that I'm trying to create. And I said, well, unless it's magic smoke, if it's created by gunpowder that's made out of potassium nitrate, sulfur, and charcoal, you really ought to turn it white. Just my considered opinion. But
right.
that's just an example.
Stay tuned, and we'll have more of our interview right after this.
The Kindle Chronicles is a Friday audio podcast all about the Amazon Kindle e-reader. I'm Len Edgerly, and each week I present Kindle news, tech tips, an interview, a quote, and listener comments. I've been a writer all my life, and I'm doing this podcast because the Kindle has simply renewed my love of reading. I hope you'll stop by for a listen. You can find me at thekindlechronicles.com or by searching for Kindle in the podcast area of the iTunes Store.
Sure. I wonder if we could talk about what the process of publication was like for you. How did you end up selling the books to Rock, and what was that process like?
Well, it was a very atypical experience from what I understand. As I said earlier, I'm new at this. I have done a lot of stuff, experiences, and I was doing a lot of things at the time that I was writing the stories, at least the initial volume. And in fact, I believe I was on the Alamo set when I decided I'm going to write a book, something to do in my copious spare time, which really wasn't very much, because when I wasn't on set, I was in the weapons trailer fixing broken guns that were broken all during the day. But occasionally I would have some time in the evenings, and I would just kind of write some ideas down. And that's how the story began to take shape. And like I said, I think maybe it had something to do with the Alamo experience compared to the Asiatic Fleet experience that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
That may have influenced it, but and I kind of tinkered on it. When I came back from the movie, I went back to my normal life, but I continued to write, and I enjoyed it. And suddenly I realized it was pretty much finished, and well, I'm going to get it published now. Well. In my naivete, I knew that there was more involved in it than that. I'd done a little research on the process of publication, and I knew it wasn't going to be a cinch. In fact, I honestly didn't really think that it would, it was something that I was going to be able to devote enough time to in order to get it done at that time. And I sent out, I guess 25 or 30 queries, and started getting rejection slips. Mm-hmm. I said, okay, I have to admit I was a little frustrated from the perspective that I didn't, they say, no thanks, not for us, or something like that, but I never really knew why. But I didn't approach it from the perspective of, well, they're a bunch of jerks, they don't know what they don't know what they're missing. I considered it like, well, I'm screwing something up, so I've got to figure it out. I don't really have time for it now, but I'll research it further, and when I have more time, I'll fix it and try again. That puts me in a little aside. A lot of writers believe that every word they write is a child of their body. I don't believe that at all. I strike entire sections out of my writing on a regular basis, mm-hmm. because it suddenly dawns on me that it's not appropriate, or I'll put it in later, or I'll get rid of it entirely, because the words really don't matter that much. It's the story mm-hmm. that you're trying to tell. if anything needs to be a child of your body, it needs to be the story. The words are a means to convey that story, and compared to the story, they are meaningless. And so, criticism of a turn of phrase or whatever has never bothered me in the slightest. I may look it over and say, well, I don't agree with you, but if somebody does bring something to my attention, I look at it and say, hey, you're right. I have no problem with that. And maybe that attitude was one of the ones that helped me out when I got much to my surprise, I got a response from an agent who was very interested
Mm-hmm.
in the series, and his name is Russell Galen, and he's just absolutely the best there is, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm a little prejudiced, I have to say, but we've since become good friends, and I think that's a great relationship to have with an agent. And I had screwed up a bunch of stuff, and he took the time, which is extraordinary, to tell me, what to fix. How, he didn't give me the words. He
Right.
just said that this needs to be fixed, and then let me see it again. And so I went through and fixed it, I guess, and I sent it back to him, and he said, yep, that's what I had in mind. And within a month, I had a contract.
Wow.
It was almost a Cinderella kind of situation, I guess, although I don't look very good in glass slippers.
As I mentioned before, the Destroyermen original books are a trilogy, Into the Storm, Crusade, and Maelstrom. I wonder, do you have other Destroyermen novels planned, or are you currently writing anything?
Well, as a matter of fact, it's interesting you should ask that. I have submitted synopses for more in the series, and right now I'm just waiting to hear back from the publisher. And I've been overwhelmed with contacts, and it, like I said earlier, it is so gratifying. I find myself writing almost more in response to the contacts I get than I do on manuscript lately. And I don't dislike it in the least. I mean, it's particularly when it comes from veterans, or it comes from people whose lives the stories have actually touched. And the underlying theme, if there really truly is one in the series, is honor. I would tend to rate them in kind of a PG-13 range, and that's deliberate. It's fiction for grown-ups, but I wouldn't be ashamed to let my daughter read it.
Right.
And there is a message, I think, or I've tried to instill a message in the storyline of honor, and I think that's something that's missing a lot in literature today. I have nothing against the many fine novels that feature kind of the anti-hero. Some of my very favorite stories are along those lines, but by the same token, I think that every now and then you need something that's uplifting. Even I've got some really, really bad characters in my stories, and I've got some really strange ones.
Sure.
Some of them are squirrels, literally, as far as their personalities are concerned, and none of them are based on any particular person. I want to make that clear.
Right.
Anybody's listening. Now, but I have told some of the people that I know, said, now this character has a little bit of you in it, and they're composites. They really are. But the neatest thing I get is I've had emails. I got an email from a guy who'd been in the Navy for 20 years, And if you're familiar with the Dennis Silva character, he said he had a PO just like that, and if he didn't know better, he'd think I'd based him on that character and or that character on him. And that's kind of one of the neat things about it, because everybody knows somebody like some of these kind of eccentric characters.
Exactly. I wonder who are some of the favorite writers that you read. Who do you read for fun?
Oh man, I love, like I said earlier, I love David Weber. David Drake is great. As far as science fiction is concerned, I'm a big fan of Steve Sterling. I like a lot of his historic fiction. Alan Eckert's stuff that he wrote, called, The Frontiersman and things of that nature is outstanding. I think that was kind of, in many ways, it began I don't know if it actually influenced, but it kind of began or set the standard, I think, for Jeff and Michael Shara's stuff, the Killer Angels and things like that. Although a lot of their dialogue is fictional, and in many cases, Alan Eckert's stuff are things that the characters are purported to have said.
Right.
In real life. He still does it in a literary fashion that makes it read almost like a novel.
Right.
And so I like his stuff. I was a big fan of Bernard DeVoto in college, which just drove my instructors crazy. They said, well, he'd been excoriated, when he was writing Across the Wide Missouri and 1846 Year of Decision and some of the others that he wrote about American expansion, Course of Empire, because he wrote history in a literary fashion.
Right.
And of course, when I wrote my master's thesis, every little descriptive term that I put in there, I had to go back and studiously remove the times, in the various incarnations of the thing, because, you don't inject things like that into history, Well, I disagree. I think that history you can bring it to life for kids, for students, for anybody, grown-ups. It doesn't matter if it's alive, if you teach it or relate it in such a way that it doesn't seem like just dry facts on a piece of paper.
Right.
And so I was much influenced by that and by those writers.
Have you read the Sharp novels by Bernard Cornwell?
Oh yeah. I like his stuff very much. I really enjoyed his Civil War series that he began, and I guess he hasn't finished it. But it was very good. I liked it very much, and I've liked a lot of his other stories that he's written.
Sure.
The Vagabond.
Right.
I can't remember the names of the series, but I've read just about all of them.
Sure.
And I'm a big fan of Homer. The Iliad and the Odyssey, and I'm sitting in my office surrounded on three sides by books from floor to ceiling. On another side are everything from matchlocks to M1 Garands, and quite a few shooting trophies, I must say. But I get a lot of inspiration and ship models. A lot of ship models in here. Kind of an eccentric library in a sense. But I read a lot of history. I read a lot of historical fiction. I love Patrick O'Brien and Alexander Kent.
Right.
And all of the Hornblower series. I mean, I guess if somebody asked me what influenced me the most, I would give them this long list of authors and say, just mix them up.
Right. Well, as we come to the end, I wonder if you have any advice or words of wisdom for aspiring writers who may be listening to this podcast.
Well, as I said earlier, my experience was atypical, and the more I learn about it, the more I realize just how atypical it was. Maybe I was blessed. I don't know. Maybe if there was some reason, maybe it's the honor in the stories that needs to get out there. I'm not going to try to get metaphysical about it. But the best thing I can say is to polish and persevere, because the better it is, and do not fall in love with your every written word. Read it aloud a lot. Read it to somebody else. Let somebody else read it aloud to you, and say, "Well, that sounds stupid," or not. That's the easiest way you can, because an author can get way too close to the work, and can miss a lot of what other people are getting from it, or not getting from it. And the clumsy turn of phrase, or things of that nature that you just don't pick up on, a lot of other people will.
Well, great. Thanks a lot for taking the time to talk to me. And again, we've been speaking with Taylor Anderson, the author of the recently published Destroy Your Men trilogy, and they're published by Rock. The first book, Into the Storm, is out in paperback, and the second and third books of the trilogy are in hardback and will probably be in paperback soon. Thanks for listening to the Reading and Writing Podcast. If you liked what you heard, you can subscribe to our feed in iTunes, leave a review for this podcast on iTunes, and now you can even leave a voicemail. If you like what you heard and you'd like to give us a comment, feel free to leave a voicemail at 206-888-2731. Again, that's 206-888-2731. And we'll feature your comment in a future podcast. Thanks, and we will be back soon with another interview with a writer that you enjoy reading.